Hi, everyone. Welcome back to RayCor Intel Deep Dive. We are up to session number 3. It's crazy how fast time goes. This month is very special to me. In addition to being my birthday month, I have a very special guest with me, Souzan Esmaili. She is the founder of TCAE, the Toronto Compliance and AML Enterprise. I had the privilege this year of attending Souzan's AML conference last week in Toronto. I can't wait to dive in and talk about it, and you'll be able to read more of my insights in my newsletter this month. Souzan has built one of the most respected compliance forums, I could say in Canada, but I'm going to go ahead and say globally, because her work really is first in class and something a lot of us speak to, not even just in Canada, certainly here in the US. Her group is a gathering place for practitioners, regulators, and innovators to tackle some of the toughest questions in AML, counter-terrorist financing, and just financial crime in general. So in this deep dive, we're going to reflect on the conference that we attended last week, and also the fact that Souzan chose to have the conference on 9/11, which for those of us in attendance at the conference was deeply meaningful. What better way to remember all that we've lost than to continue discussing compliance, anti-money laundering, and counter-terrorist financing so many years later, and how far we've come, but still how far we have left to go, and knowledge share with our peers about, the work that there still is to do and what ideas we have for that. Forums like TCAE are critical for our future and what the next generation of risks, where we now have things like crypto investigations, which isn't something we were talking about 24 years ago, to AI and new models of counter-terrorist financing, and what these risks will demand from compliance leaders. So with that, I'm going to give Souzan a minute to introduce herself and talk about her company and her conference before we get into some questions. Souzan, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Christina. It's such a pleasure to have this opportunity to speak to you, to your audience. And it was such a pleasure to have you and your team at our conference last week. And we were mind blown by the compliments that we received from you to be on the stage, sharing your insight, and as well from the amazing team that you brought along and was at the conference. So just a little bit about me and the TCAE. I think you put it very nicely and you told what we do, but what we love to do and what we are passionate to do is basically follow our mission of connecting, educating, and empowering our AML and compliance and crypto compliance professionals all around the world. We have been working alongside with many organizations and professionals throughout, and it has been really a rewarding experience of creating this community-oriented company, which we have built so far in the past 5 years, and we're still keep on growing. And we have basically 4 main pillars of our business that we have created in covering our mission to first training. One of our first pillars is training and education. Our second pillar of our business is consultancy and helping organization with work. And the third pillar of our business is recruitment and helping companies find the best talents in the AML crypto compliance world. And our last pillar is events and conferences, which we just had our 2025 conference just last week.
And it was absolutely a pleasure to attend. Souzan puts a lot of thoughtful details into her conference and made sure that all attendees were educated, were entertained, had opportunities to network, walked away with really cool swag. So grateful for that. And it was just a pleasure to be part of something that, there's a lot of organizations, there's a lot of conferences in this space, that are meant to network and to, drive business development. And of course, that's always front of mind for a lot of people. But I think just the meaning that went into this conference really resonated with a lot of people, certainly for me and, from people I had conversations with. So with that in mind, Souzan, at the conference this year, what themes or conversations kind of struck you as being, top of mind or most urgent for compliance leaders out there right now?
I think, always the evolvement of regulation is always there, like there are different regulations that we need to adhere to, different new requirement from the regulator is always on the top of mind. But something that was my goal for everyone who attended the conference, and I think that we don't pay too much attention to it, is to know the reason why we do what we do. To go back to our purpose, to really feel what was the key moment, what is the key driver of what we are doing, Um, I think for me, that is the most powerful and that is the key aspect of whatever we are trying to achieve, because it should go beyond our following the regulation, following the requirements from the regulators. I think we are doing an amazing work as everyone in the AML community, in the financial crime community. But because we are doing and dealing with a lot of regulations, we deal a lot of papers, we have to do a lot of things, we tend to forget the deeper reason of why this is important, the work that we do. I think if we go back to that, if our regulators even go back to that reason, if we daily remind ourselves why we're doing what we're doing, that would be more purposeful. That would be more driving the work that we do in a more purposeful way. And we would make more impact in the world. I think one of the key aspects of this conference, which we tried to, gather everyone together to, was to think about what was the key reason. And 9/11 definitely was one of the key reasons to go back and remind ourselves of what happened and how important it is, the work that we do, how much, we need to pay attention to this for creating a better future for our next generations to come. And that is one of my goal and one of the reasons of mine for my why.
I couldn't agree with you more. I remember when you first mentioned the conference to me earlier this year and the fact that you were planning to have it on 9/11 for such reason, it really struck me because we do tend to get wrapped up, in the day-to-day buzzwords, risk-based approach and check the box compliance and not wanting to do all that. But we're not, frequently thinking through why we're doing this. So certainly terrorist financing, being 9/11 is top of mind. But then in the modern day, we hear about things like romance scams and pig butchering, people being devastated, losing, their entire financial safety net and sometimes even their lives when they can't handle, the fraud and the scams. It's heartbreaking to hear. And then, we talk about the people behind the scams, and the majority of people perpetuating these scams were trafficked into doing so. And, the criminal organizations behind that, there's so many different predicate crimes and layers of fraud and human trafficking and money laundering and, a new brand of terrorism that it's easy to lose sight of that and get wrapped up in, did you fill out this Excel sheet correctly? And do you have enough KPIs measuring, your compliance team's output? So I think the fact that, you chose this date and really, tied it together with a lot of the panels that you had, there's a lot of lip service given, and I'm not really afraid to say that. There's a lot of lip service given, not even to just 9/11, but, momentous occasions in general where people like to reminisce and, tie things back to themselves and almost have main character energy around that. We saw a lot of that on social media. Never forget. And somebody posted on LinkedIn, what does that actually mean, never forget? I don't think any of us can forget the horrors of what happened that day, but what are we doing to move forward, with it? And, I don't want to be so callous as to say give it meaning, but, really not forget, like, what are we doing in day to day? And I think compliance officers especially really have a duty, to never forget in the work that we do. And in a post 9/11 landscape, a lot of laws and regulations changed. Obviously, here in the US, the USA Patriot Act came to be because of 9/11. So there's a lot of components of that. Certainly, we have to take our belts and shoes off at the airport. That's part of the Patriot Act. but then doing things like the, CIP, customer identification program, more due diligence around people entering the US banking system. There's a lot of components. And I'd love to know, especially given that you're in Canada, so there's a bit of a global perspective here as well. What do you see as being the most enduring legacy of the post 9/11 compliance regime?
Yeah, I think one of the key aspects of the 9/11 in Canada specifically was the creation of the FinTrack, which is basically our FIU. So that was one of the major key things that, it empowered, to create a financial intelligence hub in the country itself, and as well putting the tourism financing as a part of our regulations of the money laundering. So I think that was, one of the key things that, happened in Canada. What I believe that, 9/11 was really a moment that, a lot of things has changed in our industry. It became more global standard to bring everything, together. We are all, in terms of global aspect, we are all talking in the same language now. And, bringing, FATF into, thinking more into bringing terrorism financing into their standards and into the recommendation. I think that were all key points and key aspects that, we all work together to create a more standardized approach into fighting financial crime globally. And 9/11 was actually that key moment that we had to unfortunately experience to reach there. And as you mentioned, like a lot of people in the room or even, on LinkedIn could have been saying that, what does really 9/11 means? And we need to remember that a lot of people, they didn't really experience that day. A lot of them were young or even not born. So imagine the new generation who are coming into the AML space. They don't know the reason that we do because we saw it on TV, or even you happen in New York and you saw that what is happening on the ground. So I think for us, tying it back, to the conference, just reminding everyone that for the young generation, that is the reason behind of a lot of things that happen. They needed to remember that, we lost this 3,000 plus people on that day. It need to have a meaning behind it. We need to be really purposeful of when you are looking at a client that you're onboarding. You need to remember your purpose of why you're doing what you're doing. And it all goes back hand in hand together.
That is such an important point. I was in my first year of college when it happened, and it was just a sense of like, what's going on? Like, you can't even process or comprehend what's happening. But, as much as I hate to admit, that I'm getting older, you're right. There is a new generation that either were being born then or hadn't been born yet. Certainly there are younger people now, maybe their first job out of college is getting involved with compliance or finance, something in the sector completely. Or maybe they were very, very young, like you said, and they just don't remember it, and it didn't have the impact on them that it did on us. And so much has changed in these 24 years, in terms of compliance regimes, certainly globally. As you mentioned, we don't really live in the silos sometimes that we like to think we do. Canada, the US, UK, EU have AML programs that the rest of the world kind of looks to for these standards, and some jurisdictions, in Asia as well. And it really is all intertwined, especially as the financial ecosystem has become global. I mean, there's just no way around it. And I can certainly get into, it's a conversation for another day around disparate impact of certain, season laws on some jurisdictions. But for now, I'll stick to topic. And, it is a particular passion of mine to speak to younger people, not just in compliance, but, entrepreneurs and finance and just people getting into the space to learn what are your values? How do we work with you? How do we work together, towards these common goals? How do we speak your language as you come up in ranks and have ideas and develop your own companies, or start to look to our legacy systems and think it's kind of broken, we should do things a different way. So another question I'll ask you is, for these younger professionals and in particular compliance professionals, people who are inheriting a system built in the shadow of 9/11, but are now being asked to solve challenges like crypto and AI and DeFi. And I'll certainly give some of my thoughts around crypto. What advice would you give them as they navigate this new world?
I think the most important thing for anyone who wants to be in the AML space, whether in the crypto compliance space, investigation, doesn't matter. The curiosity for learning, it should never fade away. We are living in a world that it's evolving rapidly. A lot of regulation comes in, a lot of technology comes in, the fintechs, direct techs, a lot of things are happening around us. We need to be really curious, really focusing on educating ourselves every day of all these amazing things that are happening in our space. Thinking about, like growing and thinking also ahead of time of whatever we're doing right now, whatever we are focusing right now, and where we want to be in the next 5 to 10 years. Always look ahead. Always be curious about, what you can learn right now and how you can see yourself in future. I think these are the key things that, our younger generation needs to learn more about it. Because when we are focusing on education, we are investing in ourselves, we are betting in ourselves, we are empowering ourselves with the knowledge. And that could help us grow even and beyond the vision that we would have for us, in the next 5 to 10 years. Having a goal, setting a goal, that is important, and because that is going to navigate you through where do you see yourself, and then going rapidly in terms of what can you build every step on the way to get where you want to be.
Yeah. And I think that that is something that you excel at, with TCAE, is that, quest for knowledge and knowledge sharing and education, because you're exactly right. And in the world of compliance, we hear all the time. I mean, it's really become, a catchphrase that we don't want check the box compliance. But a lot of what we're doing without quite realizing it is in fact check the box compliance. So I know that training and education is near and dear to your heart. It's near and dear to mine. And it seems to be near and dear to the regulators as well, because I'm constantly seeing in audit findings, not that, compliance teams aren't training, they are, but regulators are now wanting to see teams go beyond, the PowerPoint deck where you're learning about, the stages of AML and the 10-question quiz at the end. They're wanting to see, how are you learning what's going on in the world beyond just correspondent banking or the AML basics, the pillars. How are you applying it at your desk in the day-to-day? How are you taking into account new red flags and typologies? We might all have a sense of, okay, we kind of know what our job is. We know we have to come in and monitor transactions or do onboarding or do risk assessments or do model validation. But how are we keeping, as a lawyer, we have CLE, continuing legal education. How are we doing the same thing in compliance? So to have conferences like this, that are affordable for people is really meaningful, because this is top of mind for really everybody at the moment. How do I continue beyond just, the company prescribed training to learn more? So do you want to talk a little bit more about what you offer through TCAE and how you aim to help kind of plug the gap that we have out there right now with training?
Yeah, for sure. But before that, let me tell you more about, what you mentioned. And I feel that it's very important um, that we all learn that, like education, like definitely creating a space that we could learn from each other is also very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
I think, that was, one of the key role for me to create the conference, was that I felt that, okay, we are all having, like we're going through different certifications, we're getting all the certification, but a lot of knowledge is actually downloaded on the experience. And some of our younger generation would not have that sufficient experience to do the job. And learning from those who are the leaders and understanding how they do the work, it is quite essential for them to come in, to be in a room that they can afford to be in, attend a conference that it's not too expensive and the tickets are affordable for them, to come in and sit down and learn from industry experts who have done the work, and learning from them the tidbits of how they can really implement the regulation and put it into practice. I think that is also the key important, because we can read the regulation all way long. We can go through the study guide of a certification and we can, learn it by heart. On the real time and really putting it into practice, how can we do that? And we really need to be doing the work. And imagine those who are looking for jobs and they don't have the job. They need to learn how to do it. Listening to those who have done it, it can help them definitely, to move forward along their path. And thank you for asking about what we do and what we offer. We are, as you know, we are passionate about, training and educating our community. We have been helping a lot of companies and institutions into helping them with their training, either on the on-demand training or even, a virtual and in-person trainings that we have done for their team and for their staff. We customize them and help them really to understand what exactly the real work and real implementation of regulation it really means. And also on top of that, we're also a chain analysis training provider. We are one of the first in North America that we have partnered with them, and we have been training more than thousands of professionals all around the globe, from law enforcement, from regulators, from all the crypto exchanges. We have trained their team into educating them on the chain analysis courses. And I think, what the time that I decided that this partnership is important was the time that I felt in 2021. I felt that there's nothing out there for our compliance and AML community to learn about crypto space. And because crypto is really evolving very fast, and there is not many people who are educated to understand the risk, understand how to deal with those risks, I feel that this is a very key, essential training for them, to see and gain that knowledge, how to investigate, how to learn about, the blockchain, how to get to know about the nuances of this ecosystem, and then use their compliance and AML knowledge to transition and bring that mind into the new era of the crypto compliance space.
I think you are right on the money there. And that kind of leads into, some of the next rounds of questions I was going to get into and the topic I was going to get into. This ties in so nicely with discussing compliance, in a post 9/11 world. Obviously, we still have to monitor, traditional TradFi products and services. Wires haven't completely gone away, ACH and all of that. But if 9/11 put wire transfers under the microscope, which it did, today's version is crypto rails. We have things like mixers, we have the Wild West that is DeFi, regulated, centralized crypto exchanges are the new firewalls for things like sanctions evasion and terrorist financing. Terrorist networks don't really need to move billions to be effective. We can look to North Korea for that. A few wallets getting through a handful of different regulated exchanges, the right mixer can bypass controls that seemingly took us 20 years to build. The currency is now digital and the counterparties are effectively pseudonyms on the blockchains, that you mentioned. So to my mind, and this is something I spoke on in my panel at the TCAE conference, crypto compliance really is the new frontier of counter-terrorist financing.
Mm-hmm.
This realm is counterterrorism. Every time we're doing KYC checks and sanction screens and every SAR we're filing, it's part of a new defense line that didn't exist 24 years ago, with a technology that, I don't know, maybe was brainstormed then, but certainly wasn't mainstream. And it's the operational programs inside of exchanges, the off-ramp banks that they work with and fintechs that make the policy real, so with that thought in mind, do you think that the frameworks, built for, the time period after 9/11 and the products that existed then are still serving us well today, or have they locked us into outdated ways of thinking about risk? And I'd love to hear that through the lens of doing things like Chainalysis training, and some of the other trainings that you offer. Like what are you seeing real time in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like in terms of the framework, there is a yes and no. I think a part of the framework that, we are using on the traditional space, yes, it's kind of working. Like, for example, looking at the risk-based approach, or looking at, doing due diligence, all of that are really a backbone of everything that we do. But one thing that I'm not happy in terms of, things that are happening is, for example, the measurement of, how we are achieving success. What I'm seeing more of is how many SDRs we have been filing, or in US, how many SARs, we, while I don't think that this is a quite a number for success. I think that we need to understand that how many or how much even we have done in terms of what is the outcome of, the work that we have done. How many captures of how many, let's say, criminal gangs we have captured. How many assets we recovered. Was the real tangible impact. I feel we need to focus more on that. If we look at the infrastructure that are built, it's not going to get us there. When I see the blockchain, when I see the power that the blockchain has got, and when I see that, how it could be, like pseudonymous or even, in some level, transparent, to see how things are really moving to going around globally. If we look at that, and if we imagine if we could have a world where all the transactions that are happening in the banking space could be in that infrastructure, where we can see in real time that people are transferring funds from one account to another, to another, to another, and it goes all globally. If we could have a global infrastructure that all the banks speak to each other and they're not working as silos. If we could have infrastructures where we could build that are more driven by risk, rather than just ticking the box of, yes, we follow this regulation. If we could have had frameworks that are all automated, how incredible that infrastructure would be. These would be things that, we could build together in terms of, the future that we want to have. Because I think the power that the criminals have got is that they are working globally together. And this is something that they know that we lack, because not all the institutions are talking to each other. Different jurisdictions have their own privacy laws. They have their own boundaries, and criminals are leveraging that. While if we could have something that we could be universal and everyone would use the power of the connection, the power of knowledge sharing, information sharing with one another. Imagine how fascinating that could be. We would be living in a world that, a bank in US could know what actually is happening to their client, which is based in that they're doing a purchase or doing a transaction in Asia. Like how incredible that would be, and how much information that could, give and provide. And if we could, just go beyond just to know your client, like just knowing your client is not enough. I feel that we need to do more what I call KYCP, and what it means, know your client's psychology. Let us dive deep into the psychology behind the behavior of our client. Why this client is deciding to do these transactions. why they're doing these behaviors. Let us understand the psychology of this client, and let us go deeper, not just about knowing them, about their, where they live, what is their address, what is their identification, but let's know their psychology of their behavior. And that could help us, to go 5 to 10 steps ahead of, their behavior. We could predict the future rather than just be reactive of, what is actually happening on the ground.
I think that will be the top soundbite. KYCP, know your customer's psychology. And you're exactly right. I mean, just like with most things in life, understanding somebody's motivation behind why they're doing things is going to give you a lot of information. So I think that's a fabulous takeaway. And to your earlier point, just more info sharing. Yeah, what a world it would be if we could actually get the travel rule up and running and working for so yes, we can definitely dream, but I mean, you're exactly right. I was going to wrap up with a question around, what do you think will define the next era of AML? But I think your answers are even better than that, because what will define the next era will ultimately be more policymaking, reactive actions, inevitably a lot more of the same. But what should define the next era of AML is absolutely that, more cooperation, especially on an international level. And
Mhm.
I'll throw in there, not just because we hear a lot about, having more conversations with regulators. That's all well and good, but also having more conversations with law enforcement, with the FBI. Well, here in the US, the FBI, the police. I had Homeland Security reach out to me last year begging me to come in and talk to them about crypto and what we see at the exchanges, because they're boots on the ground actually doing the investigations, whereas we're looking behind a computer screen and not really understanding, the psychology behind why this is happening the way it is. And we're just kind of, guessing to the best of our ability, that level of just knowledge sharing, info sharing, not really gatekeeping it. And then, yeah, getting to the whys behind people are doing what they're doing. I remember reading articles, a lot of the terrorist caliphates that are, recruiting young people. And why are young people going to join this? Because they don't have a community. They don't have a sense of belonging. It's not necessarily inherent evil behind why they're doing what they're doing, but they're being offered a place to, have community and, fellowship and belong. And we're not talking about stuff like that, we can talk about the, the evils of terrorism, but are we really going to solve it if we're not understanding some of the whys behind what's actually happening? So yeah, thank you for answering a question I didn't ask, but giving a better answer to a question I should have asked. Where should AML go, in its next era? And I appreciate you for that.
Yeah, of course. I feel that, there is a lot definitely we need to do with bringing the advancement in the crypto space into the traditional world,
Hmm.
learning from that and implementing that, to move ahead. But I hope that this could really happen in our lifetime, because it's something that, it can really, really help us, and it could empower, the compliance teams around the globe into, making it, happen.
Hmm.
And we need to see impacts. We need to see tangible impacts. How could we, do what we want to do if we just know that just only 1% of, or even less than 1% of, the work that we do is getting recognized or getting into the outcome of
Hmm.
capturing, criminals. How can we have the faith of keep on doing things?
Hmm.
We need to see bigger outcomes. We need to see the impact of, the work that we do. And it would not happen without having a right infrastructure, having a global community really working together to make that happen. And yeah, like I think that, it could be something that, we could hopefully, put our efforts towards encouraging, the policymakers, the hopefully other governmental bodies, to pitch in and really push into, seeing that change.
Hmm.
Because the work that we have done so far, to be very, very honest, I don't see a result if we are
Mhm.
going to continue the same way that, we're doing things. We
Right.
need a drastic change.
I agree with you. That's why I love asking the provocative questions on this show so that we can really get into what actually needs to be done, to accomplish these goals and aims and not just pay lip service to it. And I appreciate you so much for coming on and sharing your insights, frank and honest about what more we need to do, the importance of education, how 9/11 has shaped our lens from the compliance point of view, the challenges that we're facing now, the importance of, crypto in this, brave new world. I think conversations like this are exactly why the community needs forums like TCAE. And I know our audience is going to take a lot from this. So, Souzan, thank you so much for being here today. If people want to get in touch with you, learn more about TCAE, where can they go to do that?
Definitely LinkedIn is the best way to approach me. I'm always available and frequently, check my messages there. So feel free to send a message if anything in this podcast really provoked an idea in you. And if there is anything that I can help and support you, please feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to help and support you.
And she definitely is. I can speak from experience. Thank you again so much, Souzan. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in yet again to RayCor Intel Deep Dive, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Christina.